Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be hailing from. Welcome to 2022 and welcome to RHEL Presents live stream. My name is Eric, the IT Guy Hendricks. I am a technical marketing manager here at Red Hat and your host of RHEL Presents. I'm really excited to be back with you all. It's been a bit, at least it feels that way. Of course, RHEL Presents wouldn't be RHEL Presents without my favoriteest co-host ever, Mr. Brian Smith. Welcome back.
Hey, Eric. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. So I think now, I mean, it's the 12th. I've kind of interacted with everybody. I think we can officially say that it is a new year. Next person to say Happy New Year, I'm just going to ban on Twitter. I don't know.
Yeah. Looking forward to today's show, which is going to include some RHEL system roles as well, from what I understand. So that's always good.
Yeah, I'm sure you had nothing to do with that being part of the topic. But that is a great point. If you haven't heard of system roles, Brian does have an awesome blog series out on redhat.com about system roles and how you can use basically an Ansible playbook to define VPN connections, set up services right out of the box. I mean, it is an amazing tool, and we're really excited to cover those off and on throughout the year. But today we're actually going to talk about one particular system role, and more so an actual workload on RHEL. To do so, we wanted to bring in. We definitely made sure Brian was available for that, but we also wanted to bring in one of our product managers. And I am really excited to introduce Lewis. And so let's bring him onto the show. Lewis, welcome to Red Hat Enterprise Linux Presents. I think you're a first time caller.
Hey, Eric. It's exciting to be here. Brian, it's good to see you.
Well, you want to start out and tell us what it is you do here at Red Hat?
Sure.
Of course, you brought your fedora, so bonus points.
Yeah. So I am responsible for the SQL Server workload on Red Hat platforms. So that includes not just RHEL, but Red Hat OpenShift, how SQL Server interacts with Ansible, all of our other components. And really, I focus on adding functionality so that RHEL is a great operating system for SQL Server. And SQL Server didn't even exist till on Linux till 5 years ago. So we've been busy and we've done a lot, and I'll show you some of that in the demos that we're going to do later.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I don't know that any of our guests have actually worn their fedora, so I mean, bonus points. So before we dive into today's topic, I did want to let you all know that we do have a live chat, whether you're following us on Twitch, on YouTube, or you can actually join our Discord channel. I'll throw the link back up there. Join us on Discord. That way you can get access to both the hosts and our guests today as we kind of dive into things. We'll be going a little bit deeper, I think, than we normally do. So let's start with this, because I was a systems administrator when SQL Server for RHEL came out, and I was like, why would I take a Microsoft workload and run it on Linux? But that turned out to be an amazing thing. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that journey and how how SQL Server for RHEL and for Linux even became a thing?
Yeah. So a long time back, there was a project at Microsoft from Microsoft Research called Project Drawbridge. And Project Drawbridge was essentially a way for Microsoft to run apps on Linux. And you can imagine this back then, this didn't make everybody at Microsoft necessarily very happy. But later on, the project was sort of rediscovered by the SQL team as Microsoft was becoming friendlier with the Linux community. And so they adapted that project and created something called the SQL Platform Abstraction Layer. And all SQL Server today, whether it's built on Windows or built on RHEL, uses the platform abstraction layer. And the result is that 95% of the code for SQL Server is the same code, whether it's running on Linux or on Windows. And that's how they got there so quickly. It's also how we got some really big customers running SQL Server on Linux out the gate in 2017. Microsoft had those people running it on RHEL on giant servers like Superdome, HPE Superdome servers, huge servers, running SQL Server, and that came about because they had the confidence, because the code wasn't changing between Windows and Linux. It's really just the same code, and SQL 17 was really just a minor bump between SQL 18, which they'd already known and was out for a year already.
So Lewis, one question that I have is, if I've decided I want to run SQL Server on Linux, why would I choose RHEL over some of the other options that are out there?
Sure. So that's an awesome question. In terms of SQL Server on RHEL, we've done a lot of really custom work, some of which I'll show in the demo. We've done a bunch of performance work. If you look at the TPCH Transaction Performance Council's benchmarks, RHEL is the leader for the SQL Server workload across the board against Windows and against any other Linux. And that's not only in terms of performance, it's also in terms of price performance. But we've also done the work I'm going to show you today around Ansible and manageability at scale. We've done a bunch of work around insights and integrating insights in with tooling from Microsoft. These things are really exciting. And, I think, to be honest, in 2017, which is now 5 years ago, we had high availability was introduced by Microsoft for SQL Server on Linux. That wasn't really great yet. But now, you can fail over in well under 20 seconds under most cases. And it really is reliable in all of the cases where we have it deployed. And we've been super happy with that reliability and availability, which is a key feature that a lot of customers really like a SQL Server database itself. It's something that keeps them on it because it does have such good availability.
So if I'm like a SQL Server DBA and I'm used to running and managing SQL Server on Windows, from a management perspective, as a DBA, how is that going to be different if I'm managing SQL on Linux?
Sure. So one of the things I didn't mention before is that you do have the ability to run containers on Linux. SQL Server for Windows support containers. So if you're a DBA and you're making changes to a database, schema changes and other changes, containers are the best way to do development and test. There's no question. And I should put in a plug for Red Hat OpenShift because it's a great environment to do development and test. So, but just aside from that, the fact that it's the same database means it's the same data. So you can move that data back and forth. And even if you're not running SQL Server on your production environments on Linux, maybe you're still running on a Windows 2016 or whatever, you can still do your dev and test on Windows. So it's worth, on Linux in containers. And so it's worth mentioning that. But when you move to RHEL, you're going to get a lot of extra performance. You're going to get extra scalability. You're going to get, of course, advantages in security, advantages in manageability, all of the goodness, right? And you're going to, we believe, get a lower net cost for your platform. And also in terms of manageability time, most of our customers say they cut the time they spend managing their systems on RHEL by 50%. And we have some success stories we can share. So that's pretty great. But if you're just the DBA and you only know a Windows environment, there isn't really much that has to change for you other than the IT administrator that you're working with, right? And I'll show you later that you can just connect through SQL Server Management Studio, which is the favorite tool for most DBAs, SQL Server DBAs, and run it on Windows, and it runs just the same whether the server is running on Linux or Windows. With that said, if you make the transition to Linux, there also is Azure Data Studio, which I'll show you as well, which runs cross-platform on Windows, on Linux, and on Mac.
So it sounds super easy if I'm a DBA. I can run it on Windows, I can run it on Linux, and I don't really have to care what's under the hood. but I've never now or any previous life that I'm aware of ever been a DBA. But I have been a systems administrator, and I've worked on Windows, and then eventually moved over to Linux, particularly RHEL. So if I am that Windows systems administrator, I'm used to clicking on maybe an MSI. You can tell it's been a while since I've worked on Windows, but an MSI or a setup.exe or something, I click a few buttons, and now my server's installing Microsoft SQL, and that's all I have to worry about. Spin up a database, spin up a couple of users, hand out the credentials, and I'm done. But this Linux thing is much different. So how difficult is it to get started with Microsoft SQL Server on Linux?
Right. So that's really where the Ansible role comes in, because that blows Windows away in terms of installation. When we later on, when we hopefully successfully, right, because it is a live demo, when we go ahead and we install a SQL Server, we're going to do it in under a minute, and you just can't do that on a Windows system.
I will say our last live demo was Scott McCarty trying to get Minecraft working under Podman. So, I mean, the bar is set really low here. We spent 40 minutes trying to figure this thing out, and we even hung out after the show. So the bar is set low. So if we can even get a database running, we are awesome. Scott, I hope you're watching this.
And one thing I'll mention real quick about this Microsoft SQL Server Ansible role that we have available is that is available for all RHEL customers, right? So you don't have to necessarily have an Ansible subscription to use that. If you do have an Ansible subscription, you can use it from automation controller and whatnot. So there are benefits of that. But if you are just a RHEL customer, you do have access to that role, and you can use it to do these quick and easy installations, like Lewis is mentioning here.
Yeah, it is just so much. It's so fast. I mean, it's really impressive to go see it doing all of the things that it has to do. So. All right.
So it's easier, it's quicker to get started and to manage SQL Server on Linux. What about some of the peripheral systems? Like immediately, as we're talking Microsoft, what comes to mind is Active Directory. Can I still integrate SQL Server with Active Directory, even if it's Linux under the hood?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we make it really easy right in through our web console to connect to an Active Directory server. But it frankly used to be a little trickier to get that SQL Server piece integrated. And Microsoft has done something really cool in the last few months and released a tool called AD-Util, which actually allows you to manage all the things that you would ever need to manage in Active Directory as a user authorized within your own organizational unit, right? To go and actually create users, manage principals, do all of the things associated with a SQL Server account. And this is all in a tool called AD-Util. And we're really excited about that. And we've heard that Microsoft's actually going to offer that in the future as part of their setup routines. So even, then putting it in the Ansible role will be really easy for us. So you'll be able to just do it right within Ansible, which we're really excited about.
Very cool. So Lewis, one thing you had mentioned before was some kind of insights integration when you're running SQL Server on RHEL. What does that do, and how does that work?
So actually, there's quite a bit of work we've done with Insights for SQL Server. Insights can, of course, tell that SQL Server is installed on the system. Does everyone know what Insights even is, though? Insights.
Yeah, maybe we should do like a 30-second overview. Basically, for any viewers who aren't familiar with Insights, this is one of the values of a RHEL subscription, and it allows you to essentially, on a routine basis, your system uploads a small amount of data to Red Hat. We look through that data and find potential issues with your system. There's all kinds of other utilities we have where you can even like compare systems one to another. You can look at different patches that are available. We could do a whole hour show just on all the different things you can do in Insights, but that's a real high level overview. It's an online service value add for RHEL where you can get insights into what's going on in your system and and find areas where, you can do things to improve security or reliability of your workload.
Yeah, and we'll see an example of it in the demos, because we're going to look at the web GUI, and one of the things you can look at through the web GUI is the insights report for the system. So,
Definitely.
but I think that the key thing is to understand that we understand what's going on outside of SQL Server. We're very good at that, and we know about what tuning should be set for if a SQL Server package is installed. We know what configuration, what security settings should be there, what permissions, and all of that. What we don't typically know for a workload is what's going on inside of the application. And with that, SQL Server is different, because we have integrated in with the SQL, with the, what do they call it? The SQL Assessment API. And actually, part of our installation, we're going to install PowerShell. And I'm going to show you how to use some tools that we have available through our community site that you can download, that will actually configure PowerShell to produce the report that Insights uses to report up information. And that will give you then warnings and actions to take to fix issues that are internal to SQL Server. For example, maybe rebuilding an index would improve performance. The assessment API can determine that, and we can report that up in Insights and tell you, actually give you the T-SQL command that you can run remotely to go and fix that issue. And you can even actually deploy that command through Insights, through Ansible. But we're not going to go too much into that today.
Don't worry, John. We had John Spinks on the show a couple of months ago to talk about vulnerability management through Insights, and he basically asked if he could have another 15 episodes or so to talk about all the different services, and it keeps getting better every release. There's more tools, better graphs. I mean, Insights is one of the single most powerful reasons to have a RHEL subscription is because of Insights. I mean, it's like having a systems administrator, a security administrator on call, online, 24/7. Doesn't come in late to work. Doesn't miss a day of work because his favorite sports team didn't do well the previous weekend. I mean, it is so powerful. If I had that as a systems engineer, I would have had far fewer sleepless nights over the weekends.
Yeah, and I actually toured, we have our in-person Red Hat Summit events this last fall, and I actually toured and talked about Insights and RHEL security. And the level of, security integration we have there is far more advanced than even some of the security scanners out there, because, we have knowledge not only about what, that you might not have a bad version of something, but we might have, a handcrafted fix that isn't even yet a patch that can be deployed as an Ansible script through Insights. And we do that all the time, because there's always a race between when packages and fixes become available, right? And you've always got the workaround. So our tools, they'll even address the workarounds. What I will say is we don't yet have a lot of that working for SQL Server. So we'll find, we could find a security issue with SQL Server, but we're not going to yet identify that, there's a CVE for a specific version of SQL Server. Here, install this new version of SQL Server. That's something that we'd like to do in the future. So, and we're working on it with Microsoft. So
that's awesome. Yeah. So we've kind of talked about the day-to-day operations, but there's one other thing that kind of comes to mind, and that's disaster recovery. So one of the advantages to running databases, large enterprise scale databases, is the ability to have high availability, or HA. Is that feature available as part of Linux?
I think we talked about it a little bit before, but the reality is that Microsoft has a really cool HA mechanism for SQL Server. It's kind of unique in the way that it works. It is a shared nothing cluster. So that means there's no NFS or iSCSI shared storage involved with this. The replication of data is handled by SQL Server itself. And that system, called availability groups, or always on is another nickname for it, is integrated in with Pacemaker. So Microsoft actually has a resource agent for Pacemaker, and Pacemaker, as we hopefully know, is the engine behind Red Hat's high availability add-on. So, and I'll show you how that works. Your mean time between, or your time to recovery, once a node goes down, is under 20 seconds today. It's really impressive to see how all of that works. Yeah.
That is really cool. So we keep hinting at the system role. What do you say we dive in and we give this a go?
Sure. I'm going to show you first an integrated system with a cluster, and then I'll show you how we'll get there through the system role. So we'll kind of go in steps. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I guess I need to share my screen. Here we go.
Yeah.
It says I'm screen sharing. Am I not?
You are. I'm bringing you in right
Okay,
now.
great. Okay, and let's actually go to some of the other more interesting screens.
Gotta love the video meeting inception that happens when sharing remotely.
Yeah. So here is Azure Data Studio. I mentioned this before. This is the tool that you can install from Microsoft on your Linux systems, Windows systems, or Macs to see what's going on with your databases. And I have connected to a SQL server. Here I am talking to an availability group. So I'm talking to the primary node of an availability group. And I don't even know that I don't even need to know that node's name. I only know the virtual address, which is SQL.ag1 in this case. And you can look here, you'll see there's a database, it's got tables. AdventureWorks is a really famous Microsoft sample database. I'll show you a little trick here. Actually, just to show you that, our connections here are encrypted, right? We're not using connections that are insecure. So everything is connected through TLS encryption. And I'll show you how to set that up through the SQL Server or through the system roles. So this kind of gives you an idea here of what the experience is for the DBA, right? But you've also got to think about the HA side of things. So from the HA perspective, oh, look, I have a node down. I didn't even know, right? I can see that node SQL2 is down. And maybe I want to restart SQL2. But for now, just for the sake of example, we've survived a failover. We can see that node is available, or that one node is down. And for our next step, we're actually going to take a look at how these nodes are configured, at least the ones that are still up, right? So this is the user interface for the Red Hat High Availability add-on called PCSD. And you can see what services are running. You can see SQL2 is sick. We actually can't even reach it. But here we see SQL1, and we see that it is running the cluster resource agent, but it's not got the virtual address, right? The virtual address I can see is running on SQL3. Okay, so I'm presenting this cluster. I've set up this cluster. It's presented as one cluster through that virtual address, and that virtual address floats between the nodes. I lose a node. 20 seconds later, the new node takes over and is presenting the virtual address. So that's pretty much the full setup. You get access to your SQL Server. If I were running on Windows, I'll show you that later, then I would see this same kind of experience that I'm seeing here. You can see a nice thing about this is you can actually perform backups through this interface, and it's all pretty easy to use, right? At the same time, all of the T-SQL, which is the sort of the secret sauce of SQL Server, right? It has its own flavor of the SQL language. And the reason that flavor is interesting is that it has the ability to not only do, handle data, but also manage the application itself, manage SQL Server itself. And so that's how I was able to get these encryption information right out of a SQL command. So just an example of why SQL itself is cool. All right, so we're going to go ahead and shut this off for now. And I am going to actually,
just
yeah.
just thinking about the HA management, it
Mhm.
wouldn't be hard to go from what you have here to tying it in with Ansible playbooks, and say even image builder images that just you build a SQL on RHEL image using image builder that has all the standard files and packages that your company or your organization utilize, and
Right.
you have some kind of watch or a trigger that if a node goes down, you can just automatically have Ansible go out and spin up a new image and have that added to your HA management. So if you do have a node that goes down, you just shoot it, and within within 20 seconds you've got that node out of the cluster, and within a couple of minutes after that you've got a new node that is spun up based on all of your company's best practices, all of the governmental regulation requirements, and just have that added into the cluster. So you can always just have 3 nodes or 4 nodes or 6 nodes, however many it needs to be, with basically no input from a systems administrator.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, you don't even need that because you can just snapshot the image, right, and bring it up on another virtual machine, right? That's the view virtualization. So
Right.
it's really, really powerful to be in a virtual environment and use HA, right? Or you can take it, or even a container environment where you have this ability to snapshot the image and sort of freeze it in time with its configuration, so that even if it gets killed, you can bring it up somewhere else,
Right.
and
Definitely.
yeah, so that's really powerful. The last thing I was going to show you, I mentioned the management. We didn't really talk about Cockpit, the Red Hat Web Console, but that's also a really important point. Um, here's the interface for the Red Hat Web Console. I imagine that with Brian on here, you guys have seen this before. And one of the first things that it brings you to is the ability to look at Red Hat Insights results. And what we see are that there were 3 important issues that were found by Insights on this particular server. So I'm going to go log ahead in here. And we'll take a look at what those are, right? So I see here, this is my system, SQL 3, right? It's got a bunch of information about the BIOS, the configuration. But what I really want to look at is the advisor information, because that's where this information is going to be. So I'm going to look at this advice, and I see that it has detected an issue with the permissions of my Microsoft SQL key in the Etsy, or in the PKI, basically the SSL certificates and keys are stored under Etsy PKI in RHEL, and it's found that this thing is owned by someone other than root. Well, in this case, it actually has to be. So that particular issue is one that I'm going to ignore, right? Because I want SQL Server to never run as root, and I want it to be the only thing ever to be able to access its key. So that's why this one is showing up as a vulnerability. It's not really one, but for other applications that could be an issue. So it's good that it's finding it. And if you look here, you'll see a second issue, and this issue is related to the database. And what it is saying is that we haven't run a full backup on the AdventureWorks database recently. Now, ironically, I have run a full backup, but I only did it after I was looking at this Insights report earlier today. So, so let's be honest, right? I did resolve the issue already. And then the last issue here is that there also wasn't a transaction log backup performed. What SQL wants you to do is run full backups once a week, and it wants you to run transaction log backups every 24 hours. And that helps it to more quickly recover the database and to ensure that the database can sustain failovers without getting corrupted. So it's a good idea to do, right? Especially if you lose, right? There's always a situation where with HA where you lose all your nodes, and you want to make sure that you can get back the data in a timely fashion without having to go to extreme measures. So that's what that piece is about. All right. So with that, I'm actually going to exit out of here. Oh, yeah, that's saying it wants me to leave your site.
Yeah, I hate
Okay,
canceling
I'm
that.
going to do that. Yeah. We'll exit out of these guys. And we are going to go ahead and stop our 2 SQL servers. So we'll shut them down. Might as well do that cleanly. There we go. And if it doesn't shut down, then we will resort to extreme measures. We're going to start my Windows server. As we said, we take a look at there. And we'll also go ahead and start RHEL for MS SQL. Okay.
Yeah, ironically enough, I noticed a little bit earlier today when I was prepping for this show that my home lab server has been down for who knows how long.
Oh no.
I think we had a power outage over the holiday, and so I went to connect to my home lab, and nothing came up, and so I went down, turned on the monitor, plugged in the keyboard, and I guess the boot drive had changed, and so I was trying to fix that before pre-show, but I ran out of time, so my home server has been in a broken state for who knows how long.
Oh no.
The joys of being a systems administrator, especially a
Yeah.
systems administrator at home.
All right, so I have some cool stuff to share here. First thing I'm going to show you is
Yeah, let's go ahead and blow that window up and increase
Yeah.
the font if we can.
Yeah, isn't there a zoom in?
Yes.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and actually this might even be better. I don't know if you've ever done it this way, but let's go ahead and we'll zoom this up so people can see it.
Yep, and then I think it's Control Plus.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe one more time. That's looking much better.
All right. So the other thing I want to show people even before we get into this is that we have this really cool resource site that I want everyone to be able to check out. There is a community at Red Hat, okay, that develops various tools and tips and tricks and scripts and Ansible playbooks and other things that we share. And we don't just share them within Red Hat because Red Hat is obviously an open organization. We believe in open source. We share them with the world. So the Red Hat community of practice actually shares its SQL Server community of interest scripts. And this link is something that you want to take a look at. All the examples I'm going to use today are all available here, including our most popular one, which is the script that helps you to set up on Red Hat Insights with the SQL Assessment API. So we'll go ahead. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the Ansible tools that we have. And the first one we want to look at is configuring MS SQL itself. So we're going to look at mssql.yml. Okay, and you're going to see here that we've got some variables that are used to set, end user license agreement accepting, right? Microsoft always wants to see that. So those are all set to true. And then you see I'm setting an MS SQL password. Now, the truth is, this isn't a great thing to put into this file, right? Because the file someone could go and access afterward, and people are not always so good at removing the files. They often want to use them for other things. So one thing that you can do, and I recommend, is replace that. So how do you do that? Well, there's this great tool called Ansible Vault. And I can have Ansible Vault encrypt my string, okay? And then we can go ahead and we'll give it a password that no one can see. Vault password, okay? And I'm gonna copy this here. Okay.
So what Lewis is doing is you can actually put in your password into the Ansible Vault encrypt.
You can see it's actually here in the command line. Yeah.
Right. And so you can put it in there, and Ansible will actually encrypt that password for you. So if you have sensitive information that ends up on a GitHub site or another location, you can actually encrypt your vault and upload your playbook, just like Lewis has got here, and that way your encrypted password can be shared around different Git links and that kind of thing, and then only share the Ansible Vault password with specific individuals that actually need to be able to decrypt that.
It's
So just quick
just a good
overview.
idea. You don't want to have, if you can avoid having plain text passwords lying around, that's always a good idea. So, and you can't always, right? When you have to have a plain text password, you always want to make sure that it is only owned by the user and never never readable by the group or readable by other, right? That's just bad news.
Definitely.
And so all of that's important. But here, essentially, we've just replaced what we had before, but this is essentially the same thing. It's going to work exactly the same way. So the only, and after that, we have our edition. So I'm going to use the developer edition, which is a free edition from Microsoft for development use, but it works the same as the high-end enterprise edition. So it has all the same features. I'm not going to install SQL Agent right now. That is essentially the equivalent of systemd or cron internal to SQL Server. So SQL Server has all of this infrastructure with inside of itself for scheduling database jobs, or internally it can schedule backups and things like that. And I'm not enabling that right now. I'm not right now going to install full text search. I could if I chose to, but I don't need it for my specific application today. I am going to install PowerShell, and I am going to tune the system for performance. So this tune for FUA storage is essentially a variable you should always use if you're running your SQL Server database on the XFS file system. Modern storage supports force unit access, or FUA, and the only case where you would turn that off would be, I guess there might be some specific kinds of very not enterprise capable disks that you can get. So for example, there are the Optane memory disks that are the low end ones that are for the consumer market that don't support FUA. But almost everything out there that you're going to be using in an enterprise environment, or even on a laptop, is going to have FUA support. So you don't need to worry about that. It's a little bit confusing because there is this other thing called DPO, which is essentially designed for caching disk controllers to make sure that you can accelerate things, because a caching disk controller can write stuff out to a ROM or to RAM, to something other than RAM, something persistent, and you don't really need that bit. You only need this force unit access, which tells the disk that, or the disk controller, that when you've written something out, don't come to me until it's actually written out. Again, modern storage supports this. Don't worry about it. Just turn it on.
And I'll throw out too, Lewis, just real quick. So all of the system roles, we have README files where it documents, what all of these different variables are, what values you can set to them and what they do. So if you're ever implementing SQL Server with a role, just take a look at the README file and it'll explain what all these variables are. There's additional ones as well that we're not showing today. So just we have all that documented in an easy to understand README file.
Yep. And so the last thing I'm going to do is just open up the MS SQL port in my firewall, because of course we're running firewall because we want to keep the system secure. And with that, we'll go ahead. I'm cheating here because my typing is terrible. We'll go ahead and run the command to install the SQL Server, and hopefully everything goes well. Here we go. I have to use that vault password again to unlock my vault, and SQL Server is installing. And you can
so
see
while
the
this is,
yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to throw out there. So while this is installing, just one thing to mention, Lewis had this set up to install on the local host, but we could have had like a list of, several other RHEL hosts, and this could be installing this simultaneously on several hosts if we had wanted to do that.
Right. And the other thing I wanted to point out, it was 11:41 when we started. And my guess is it might just turn 11:42 when we're done. So I didn't actually look at the seconds. So But right now it is literally just installing SQL Server, and I think we are through all of the long parts of the installation. We are literally still setting up. Here we've done our setup. We are now tuning the operating system. We're tuning Linux for SQL Server. And let's see, we're installing the client tools. Those are the tools so that you can actually talk to a SQL Server from the command line. And installing PowerShell. And here we go. We're done. 11:42, 1 minute. Actually I think my stopwatch says it was 54 seconds. So I think we did pretty well.
Not bad.
Yeah.
Got in just under the minute. Just under the minute.
That's right. Now go do that on a Windows server. So now we have a full SQL Server. I said before that I would go over to my Windows machine, and I actually will this here.
And just to clarify, so that did the installation. It set up the repositories, the installation, the configuration, the tuning, started the service, opened the firewall. It did all that
in under a minute.
Yeah. Wow, yeah, that's pretty cool.
So now let's go ahead and connect to it through this is going to be the time to start SQL Server Management Studio on Windows is an uncalculated thing. So give me a second. This shouldn't take too long. I forgot the Windows variable. And in fairness to Windows, this is obviously on a laptop. So I'm running Active Directory on this system, and it's a Windows laptop. So should already have come up, but might be starting something. I really do not want to run updates right now.
And so this SQL Server Management Studio, so once you have this open,
there we go.
Is it the same process if I'm connecting to a SQL Server on Windows as if I'm connecting to SQL Server on Linux? Is there any difference there as far as the connection, or is it you don't really care where it's running at this stage of what you're doing?
You don't really care.
Okay.
But here what you're seeing is what the DBA is used to seeing, and that's what's really cool, right? If you look really, really carefully, there's a little penguin. You can't really see him, but that is the only difference between a SQL Server that is running on Windows and a SQL Server that is running on Linux. Literally, all of the settings, all of the capabilities. You can still set up you can do a lot of the work to set up an availability group right here from this interface. So the DBAs are used to having it. They're used to looking at things in it and running queries in it, and all of that is still available to them. And that's the main point that I was making. I haven't really set up a database here, but for now, let's just go ahead and we're going to go ahead and move on to the next part of the demo. To be honest, setting up a database is more of a DBA task on SQL than it is a admin task. For admins, it's typical. Like on Linux, it's typical with Postgres and other databases that you create the database as part of your workflow, right? You create the database and leave it there for the DBA to go fiddle with. On Windows and with SQL Server, the DBA does all of that. All you do is make sure that the database software is up and running. And because, remember, the way that you manage SQL Server is through SQL commands. It's much easier for the DBA to go and do that, even if you don't have familiarity with SQL commands. So that's why I didn't actually create a database here. You actually can. There is the ability to feed a SQL script in the MS SQL system role, in the Microsoft SQL system role. But in reality, that's something that the typical SQL Server DBA would expect to do themselves. Any questions on that?
No, this is great.
Okay, well, if there aren't any questions, I'm going to run through one more demo, and then I'm going to show you a few of these scripts that we make available as well. And again, both of these playbooks are now available up on our community site as well, so including the scripts to run them. This one, you'll notice I actually do sudo to root, and that was because of some permission issues with accessing the PKI files, which are run into some SE Linux issues if you just try to use Ansible Playbook on its own. So there was an extra step here of doing a sudo. But what this playbook is going to do, and we'll look at the playbook after we've finished running this, is it is actually generating a certificate through CertMonger, which is a service available on RHEL. It's generating a local certificate, and it is then telling SQL Server to use that TLS certificate and a private key to tighten up security of SQL Server. Because when we set everything up before, you'll notice we didn't set up anything to do with SSL or TLS. So all of this is getting done now, and it's hung, and I know why. Sorry about that, guys. We knew we'd run into some problem, right?
Oh, you made it farther than we did installing Minecraft, so there's that.
All right. Well, I know what to do. I just have to do it, right? So get to.
This is going way better than Minecraft. That's for sure.
I'm sorry I wasn't there for Minecraft. That sounds like that was a great fun. So what we have to do, I had already had a certificate on here. And one of the things that you'll quickly understand is that CertMonger is very, very good at managing and updating certificates automatically. That's the big reason you want to use it. And so it was upset that I was trying to update the certificate without it knowing about it. And that's exactly what was going on. So now we'll run it again, and it'll run really quickly, except we have to actually run it. You know, as soon as something goes wrong, I find it much harder to get it running again. I don't know why that is. It's probably just human nature. But here again, we are running the certificate role. We're generating our certificate and key. And I will mention that we are doing this using a CA that is generated at install time with or at setup time with CertMonger. So the CA is actually stored in a special format. And if you look at the README file that I've included with this particular playbook, it tells you what to do with that CA. Because of course you need that CA to be running on the clients that are going to connect to SQL Server if you're using client-based encryption, which is a SQL Server option we recommend. So this is set up now, but I want to show you actually how I did it. All right, Brian, did you have a comment?
Well, we got a question in the chat asking about minimum requirements for running Microsoft SQL on RHEL. Is that something that Microsoft publishes?
It is, but it's really straightforward. You know, I would personally not run SQL Server unless it's a edge case. I would never run a SQL Server with less than 3 gig of RAM. You know, and certainly you need to have a couple of cores. So I think they say 4 cores, but we run all the time on 2.
And just for this demo, just out of curiosity, how much memory are you running on these VMs that you're spinning up SQL
on? You know, it's always good to have as much memory as you can, but I think on the HA demo, I was running at 4 gig. Here, I think I might have just taken more because I knew I wasn't going to be running as much.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And this system has got plenty of memory, so I'm not running out of memory, as you saw when we ran when we were running the web console. So you can see here I'm requesting a certificate called SQL Server. I am my host name has to be included in there for SQL Server. You can't put star. My CA is the local CA on the system, generated by CertMonger. I am using, this is being used for server authentication. I'm using key encipherment. That's generating the certificate. And then to tell SQL Server, again, I'm going to have to, even though I'm changing something, I have to accept all those EULAs, right? Or Microsoft won't be happy. So the EULAs are accepted. And I'm saying I'm going to enable TLS. This is where my certificate is, my public certificate. This is where my private key is. I am only going to use TLS version 1.2. Microsoft supports potentially earlier versions of TLS, and we don't want to do that. They will be supporting TLS 1.3 in SQL 2022. That's already been announced. And I think that probably is up and working in the betas that you can get today of SQL 2022. So, but for now, if you're running SQL 2019, you're on TLS version 1.2. And the last thing you need to say, because we had already set up this SQL Server, is you need to say MS SQL TLS force. And that forces the change even if we've never set up TLS before. So for example, if I wanted to change the path of this cert, I need to say force the change. Otherwise, it's just going to go with what's already in the file. There might already be something there. So always a good idea to use force when you're trying to go and configure TLS through the system role. And that's all I did. So now we have a running system. I'll connect to this with SQL command, which is the local SQL server. And first thing we're going to try is to connect to it. We're going to use, we're going to connect to it with a -n option because we said we were going to make it secure. And I'm going to use that password that we set, that red hat with the @ 123. And I'm running SQL Server, and I am not a great person to do T-SQL commands, but here you go. You can at least see the version of SQL Server that's up and running, and that it's running on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So that was a secure connection that we did over TLS. Now, if I had used a self-signed certificate, that would not have worked because it would check the certificates to make sure that they are not self-signed because you don't want to be vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks. However, if you do use self-signed certificates for testing, I'll mention there is a -c command which says ignore the checks on the certificate. So that is an option to use, but you do never want to use that in production. This cert, obviously is still a homegrown cert and not from a official certificate authority, but it's reasonably secure in the sense that you don't have to worry that it's, someone's going to be able to easily forge it because you have, control over the content and how it's produced. So it's a little bit better than having that certificate be just a self-signed certificate, because those are really, really easy to forge. So, all right. That was the example that I was going to give. And then I wanted to show you guys some of the scripts that are available. Some of these are fairly complicated. And I will say that one of them that's in here is MS SQL install demo. That's the set of scripts that we used to use before we had the Ansible system role to set up all of SQL Server. And if you look inside of that, there's a whole set of scripts, but it's basically doing all the same things that we're doing in the role, okay? And if you want to look at lines of all the scripts, for example, let's see. So about a little under 200 lines worth of code was doing all of this. And all of that, now we've made it more robust and made it a lot more flexible, and it doesn't require any prompts or input or anything that was all required in the scripts. But we've kept this around just for historical reasons so people can look at it, and it gives you a good idea of what's going on in the role. The other thing that's here that is probably our most used script is the run assessment script, which I'll actually take you through in a moment. But I wanted to mention, don't ever try to set up a SQL Server availability group by hand on RHEL. we have built a set of scripts, which we are now in the process of putting into Ansible, that do all of this for you. And even, it is just a lot of stuff that you need to do. You need to understand pacemaker, you need to understand all of the different aspects of it. And if you look here in the what's called the params.sh file, you get an idea of all the different parameters that you need to have, you need to fill in. Don't try to do this stuff by hand, for God's sakes. Make sure that it's repeatable. Make sure that you can expand it or grow it using tools. And this is just kind of a community-supported set of tools that are widely used by the community set up availability groups. So know this is available. It works on bare metal. It works on VMware. It works on Azure. And for AWS, there actually are tools provided by Amazon. Kudos to Amazon. They actually provide their own version of this, right? So Amazon's kind of an odd exception, but for everybody else, just use these tools. It's so much easier. You'll save yourself a lot of trouble.
These scripts are awesome. I mean,
yeah.
back in my day, is how this story is starting to sound. It was go on to Stack Exchange, look at everybody else's config files, and you want to take this one from this file, and well, this one caused an error, so I'm not sure what that does. We're going to throw that one away. So we're going to pull from like these 3 different people's files and configurations and dump it into our own file, hit run, and see what breaks.
Yeah, it looks like we've run out of time, so I don't want to spend time on this last assessment demo, but the tool is there. It prompts you for passwords, sets up a special account in SQL Server that can run that the PowerShell can use to check, to inspect. Basically, it's a special account that PowerShell can log into to run the SQL Server API, the assessment API, and all of that gets called from a systemd timer. So it's pretty cool stuff, easy to set up. It asks you to set up that one account, which is called, I think, assessment login or something, or assessment user. And then the only other thing that it asks you for is, to be able to connect as to SQL to add that account. Other than that, it's pretty prompt free and pretty painless. So, and then once you're done running that, you run Insights client, and it'll automatically collect all of your SQL information and start giving you advice about that, the internal stuff in SQL Server.
That is amazing, and makes it so easy to get something as complex as even a SQL Server cluster up and running relatively painlessly, especially if you have separation of duties and the systems administrators have to install the thing, and then the DBAs have to go in and configure the thing, and then security has to come in and scan the thing. You can start to condense a lot of that down and make it just so much easier to get stuff done. And then you have more time to hang out on shows like this one.
Yeah, I really, I feel like look for the tools. Don't just try the general Linux advice, general RHEL advice. Look for the tools, because where there are tools, it's always better than trying to build your own stuff and maintain it. So
definitely, yeah, it's easier to just pull down a community role or something and fork it and adjust the pieces that you need to adjust. There's no sense in recreating the wheel all by yourself. Because then guess who ends up maintaining that for forever?
I should mention there are a number of blogs. There's a really good blog that shows you how by hand to set up that Insights piece. And that was published pretty recently. So that might be something that you can look at. I don't know if we've shared my blog channel yet, but I know we talked about it.
Let's see. Actually, I was going to give you a chance before we wrap to share that link, and I can put it in the show notes as well, because I don't see it in my notes here.
Okay, I see how to look at people's posts, but I don't see how to actually create a message myself.
Okay, we can always include that in the show notes.
Okay, great.
But yeah, what's the name of your blog? Or you're
it's
on
the Red Hat
on
blog.
Red Hat.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it's actually a Red Hat blog, and I cover all things related to SQL Server and a little bit of interesting storage stuff. Pretty cool stuff. So.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think I might have just found it.
Awesome.
That looks like you, even wearing the fedora. How about
Yep.
that? There we go. All right, so we've got that in the show notes and on the screen in front of you. So Lewis, thank you so much for joining us. I know we started talking about this episode in November, and then end of year and shutdown and holidays and all that kind of fun stuff. So thank you so much for joining us today. It was really excuse the pun, but it was really insightful.
Thanks so much, Lewis.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Definitely. We'll have to have you back on the show here soon, because I think we've got an episode coming up about SAP HANA, some of the same features and functionality, and I know you and Brian work very heavily on that as well. But to our listeners, if you've hung around with us this long, I have an exciting announcement to share. A lot of you may remember Scott McBrien. He was one of the original hosts of this show, along with Chris Short. Chris Short has moved on to other things, and Scott McBrien is now hanging out on the Level Up Hour. But Scott and I are talking about, probably in a couple of weeks, maybe 2 to 3 weeks, launching a new show to kind of partner with this one. If you've been a longtime listener of RHEL Presents, you know that we started going deeper. We've started talking more about product. But we want to be respectful to the roots of the show and get back to kind of the basics of systems administration. Here's a couple of minutes on how do you create a user, add it to a group, and then kind of have conversations about. Scott and I both have long histories of systems administration and that kind of thing. So we've got stories from the field. We've got war stories and battle scars to prove it. But we're going to do kind of a how-to RHEL. Name and branding pending, but here in a few weeks we plan on launching that. So keep an eye on our Twitter and on this show, and on the RHEL YouTube channel, and I believe Twitch as well. So subscribe, like all the things, because that's coming really, really soon. I think that'll be great help for folks that are coming over from Windows, that are new to Linux, or just hey, you're a DBA and you occasionally need to log into this Linux box. Here's some very, very straightforward tips, couple of minutes, and then we kind of do some discussion, and then we do some deeper dives. Like one of the first episodes is going to be about user administration. So it'll be, first pass will be, this is how you create a user. This is how you set a password. This is how you add it to a group. And then some discussion about some best practices, and then follow it up with some deeper demos around, this is how you set expiration on a password. This is how we think you should delete or expire accounts, things like that. Just very, very 1 to 200 level type stuff. Just because we know that this show kind of started out trying to kind of handle the both sides of it, doing introductory topics as well as product topics. So we focused the last couple of months on, of course, we had this multi-month host shuffle that happened, and then we changed streaming platforms, and then we had the holidays. So now that this show is kind of leveled out a little bit, we're going to get that one up and running. That way we can be respectful of both topics. We might drag Brian over there every now and then, but for the foreseeable future, Brian and I are going to continue this show every other Wednesday at let's see, what is it? It's 2 p.m. So at 2 p.m. Eastern. So I hope to see you all soon. And Brian, you want to mention next week's or next episode's topic?
That's a good question. I don't actually know what the next one is.
I threw you under the bus there. I'm so sorry. So we actually had to shift a few things around, right? The like our second day back. So I won't share what it was going to be, because we're going to revisit that here in a month or so. But actually, in 2 weeks, we're going to have Mr. Carl George on the show to talk about Apple. And so we're going to get into a little bit about the relationship between Red Hat and Apple, and then as well as Apple and Fedora and Red Hat. We're going to talk about that relationship. We might be a little bit lighter on the demo portion next week, in 2 weeks. Sorry, but I think it'll be really exciting and really interesting to talk about Apple. There's been a lot of questions that have come our way about what's supported, what's not, how does that look. So join us in 2 weeks, where Carl George will be joining Brian and I for that. And once again, Lewis, thank you so much. Really excited to have you on the show. And until then, folks, stay healthy out there. Stay warm if you're in the Midwest. Well, other people have winter too, but it went from 65 on Christmas Eve to I think 25 within about 4 days. So we're still reeling from that here. So, but anyway, I'll shut up. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Lewis.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.